It works. Perfect. Hello, 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 and welcome to a new video. Now, this is something that's been kind of thrown around and asked about. Not directly, but I know a lot of you have had issues previously with trying, to play with spoofing your calls, changing your CID, whatever it may be. Once again, I want to emphasize all of this should be done in an isolated environment, only with devices or numbers you control or that you've been given consent to screw with, basically. Don't use this to go send scams out, um, things like that, basically. So, nevertheless, we're gonna get right into it, and many of you have even seen VoIP MS, one of the providers I mentioned, has actually changed some of their protocols. Now, this is a part of a U.S. law that was enacted. So here in the U.S., what has happened is something called stir shaken in the Traced Act. Essentially, what happens is spoofing is going to become a thing of the past. Well, it can still happen on some cases with some carriers. Things are being cracked down on, tracked down, whatever you want to call it. And essentially, these carriers, these networks that are just sending out nonstop garbage, basically. Spoofed calls, they're, ignoring abuse emails, things like that, are being shut down. Other networks are, threatening that will no longer accept traffic from your network, things of that nature. Now, you might be asking, what is stir shaken? What is this, traced act? Things like that, and how does it affect me? First thing is, stir shaken is a concept and protocol, kind of, in a way. It implements on top of SIP. And as you can see here, when you send that SIP invite, your carrier authenticates the authentication service, or your carrier may have one built in, and essentially signs your calls as long as you're both authenticated with the service, as well as you own that CID. I'll get that in here in a minute. Once this call is then sent out of the carrier network, your origination carrier, and then on to whoever it may be, the receiving end, this receiving end validates that token and that certificate with whoever it may be, their provider, validation service, however it may be. Excuse me, I can't speak. And then from there, depending on the levels of A, B, C, or not available, basically not supported, those calls may or may not be passed along. Now, if we take a look here, we have our A, B, and C. Getting right into it, A is that full attestation. Both the carrier you are calling from, your origination carrier, once again, is supposed to say they know who you are and you are authorized to call from that phone number. B is usually they know who you are, but that number may or may not be, something that's a part of their account. Usually, I've observed with these carriers, these networks, they will 9 times out of 10 have some sort of safety measure in place where you have to validate that number from the other end. It's how Twilio is currently doing it. It's how I believe Telnix does it. And it's currently how VoIP MS is doing it, where if you want to spoof or change your caller ID to this other number, you basically have to validate it. However they do it, whether it's an SMS call, your code is 12345, however they choose to do it. But essentially it comes down to that carrier, when you call outbound, is now announcing, yeah, we know who this person is, we know who this company, this organization is, but we're unsure as to whether or not they own this phone number. For a while, VoIP MS was signing calls with B. They may still be from their network, even though you own the phone number or not. And I think this is a part of their implementation and doing their magic behind the scenes, because Stir Shaken had to be implemented across many major carriers. I know it was, I think, Verizon that requested to try and push the Trace Act out further, the requirements, because they were still in the middle of trying to build it all out for their network. There's a few other ones, but in general, it's been a whole nationwide act to try and move to this, move to building it, implementing it, and getting it up and running on the carrier. Now, a lot of talking here, a lot of information. You might be asking, what does C do in that case? Well, C is the carrier most likely supports stir shaken. However, it's usually used for international gateways where they're receiving calls in from outside the United States or outside of the observed territory where they're at. And then from there, they accept calls in. They have no idea who it is, whether or not they're authorized to use phone numbers, probably even where they're located, most likely. Um, and you'll see that if you have calls signed to C, which is still common on some providers and systems these days, it's I'm not exactly sure why. It depends on the platform and stuff you're using. I can't get into detail on it. Um, but it's weird, to say the least. You own the phone number, you bought the phone number, but it's still a C, even though you have an account with them and everything. It's out of my scope. I don't deal with it, at least with them. And then finally, there's the not available. So this is basically where the origination carrier or the carrier calling from, uh, once again, is also referred to sometimes as your SIP trunk. This is where you send your call request to. Um, Not available means that the carrier doesn't even support stir shaken, which is pretty rare these days. If anything, it's usually for outside carriers. Carriers who may be UK. I'm not sure if the UK is implementing anything like this currently. Maybe Australia, maybe New Zealand, China, places like that, where they may not be required to implement stir shaken. It may just be cheaper for them to deal with whatever they're doing now, or even just forward it up to an upstream carrier, however they choose to do it. But once again, not available is pretty rare these days. Now, with this being implemented and everything, you might be asking, okay, they sign these calls. What happens next? What do the carriers do that receive these calls? This is where it is up to the carriers on how they choose to deal with it. A and B, I've observed, usually will come right through. It comes through on AT&T, I'm sure Bell, Rogers, all these guys, because A is essentially everything's green lit, good to go. B, for the most part, when I initially observed it, it was pretty good across the carriers. You might see some hiccups here and there, and those could have just been glitches as well. And then C, finally, it really depends. Because, well, it is an international gateway, and, many, validated and good standing companies, I guess is the best way to put it, may have, legitimate calls to place to these other people that are in international regions. India to the US, China to the US, New Zealand to the US, whatever it may be. The issue is that the carrier that's sending these calls from the US they can't validate anything. So these days, I usually see it dropped. Some of the larger business carriers, like if you're sending calls to a Twilio number and stuff, sometimes I'm sure you can. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure you can change the settings if you can receive certain calls. I might be incorrect on that, but usually with Twilio, they're really customizable system when it comes to voice applications. So I wouldn't say it as either it's a feature currently being implemented or something that's already available. And then not available, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see these calls get dropped. Even in most cases, even if it's not dropped, it might come up as scam likely. You might see problems. It's just all over the place. You might even just be straight to voicemail, and the other party may not. So I'm going to take a look here and show you guys a few things, just at, what the FCC is taking a look at, what they've implemented, and we'll kind of observe it. So we take a look at our browser here. We can see that we're looking at stir shaken and giving you some of the information. Small plug here. I have a search XNG instance available. Search xng.tools.dwx.net. Have fun searching. Don't search for illegal shit, please. We take a look at the Trace Act implementation. It is known as the Telephonic Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence Act. This was the whole part of implementing Stir Shaken, getting it ready, getting it set up at the carriers, and showing, we really mean business when it comes to shutting down these illegal robocalls. And, even many of these calls Could be from legitimate companies just violating TCPA as they please. So there's a lot to it. I'll be sure to add this link to the description and stuff. But it kind of shows you the implementation, different barriers, you know, how it may have affected carriers in the past, because this has kind of been thrown around to validate numbers when you're calling outbound. But yeah, there's a lot of best practices to it, information about it, and things like that. They have another article here about call authentication and kind of a bit more depth about what StirShaken does. And the cool thing about it too is that when the origination carrier, caller, whoever it may be, sends a call to the receiver gets that certificate and they can trace it right back to who sent the call, whatever carrier it may be, and whatever. If the carrier can't validate who this person was, or that they weren't even supposed to send those calls in the first place, accept them, whatever it may be, they're probably going to get hit with a fine, or they may be threatened that, hey, we as Verizon are no longer going to accept your traffic if, you know, you're just going to let this thing happen. So it's very in depth. It kind of gets into it, and it's, once again, a lot of this is more US focused and US based. I'm not sure exactly if, you know, some of our allies may be implementing it, like Canada or the UK, for example. I want to say it's entirely up to them. They could be implementing their own protocol. I hope not. But yeah, it's kind of an all-in-one show. So, finally here, if you're wondering, hey, my carrier supported, I'll add this in the description as well, but you can actually look up in the robocall mitigation database by the FCC, hey, does this carrier support StirShaken? Am I going to be able to make calls maybe to outbound leads, customers, whatever it may be? So for example, here we can see Callfire, which I know they're a pretty big dialer. I want to say they're a dialer. They have partial StirShaken implementation. So this could mean that they have it supported, but they're not fully validating things just yet. I've seen this on a lot of carriers where they've implemented it internally. They haven't signed calls fully just yet, so all the calls will probably be going out as like a D level, for example. You can see all sorts of information and stuff like that. And this is all public information, once again, all by the FCC. Or, you know, say, okay, we have the Call Tools dialer. We can look up Call Tools, enter, and see they have complete StirShaken implementation. So 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to get signed with a B or an A. Even if you get signed with a B and you want to get up to that A level, because, you know, some carriers may be a bit touchy on how you're signing calls, you can usually request from your carrier, dialer, whatever software it may be, hey, this is who we are, this is our company, this is what we're about. We've observed that, hey, our calls are being signed with B. We'd like to bump up to an A. And this isn't like a one and done, like, we know that your calls are going to be signed as this. There's always all sorts of hiccups and stuff with that. But it's really entirely up to your carrier on how they choose to sign those calls. Which might be scary, but overall, it seems to be pretty good for the most part. Although I do want to say, I am probably going to make a video on this later on. There is definitely an interesting, where was it? This number, I called it several times before. I know it's not a legitimate business, and I believe it was on like Robokill and a few other platforms. These calls were blocked. Surprisingly, AT&T Active Armor originally didn't pick up on it until afterwards, so I want to say when they started using that phone number, it was probably relatively new. Maybe they just bought it or something. Let me see here. Oh no, they're signing it. Okay. Interesting. Anyways, besides the point. Spammers and scammers are still sending calls out. And the best thing to observe is double check your facts. I just recently received a call for Southwest because I won something. just send an email to whoever they said they were with, and be like, hey, was this you guys calling? Double checking. And obviously, if you can't validate them, if you don't know who they are in the first place, make sure that you don't give them any private information. So, I want to kind of make this as an informational video for some of you who may be kind of just curious about what's going on and why you're not able to do this, or this. And yeah, so overall, guys, any questions, make sure to hit me up on Discord, Instagram, whatever it may be. I got a Telegram for you too. And yeah, what else was it? It might be a bit harder to reach me on Instagram. It's a hit and a miss sometimes. I don't usually check Instagram, but yeah, feel free to donate. Check out my Linktree, all that jazz. And yeah, if you have any messages, shoot me a message on Discord or something. Hop into my server. Feel free to send me a PM, however you choose. And yeah, y'all's a good night.